Welcome to Stellar Strategy Gaming. This is Mara and Ben, and today we're going to be talking about the classes that are the best for if you need to get in somewhere you're not supposed to be, if you need to take somebody out through subterfuge rather than raw magical or physical force. Of course, those can only be monks and rogues, the two classes that are more than anything else defined by dexterity. And I guess we'll go ahead and start with the monk class, since that is the simplest of the classes. They say fighters are basic, but monks are the best class if you want to just embrace the poverty. If you do not want to worry about equipment, if you do not want to worry about literally anything but your own stats and abilities, monks is a class for you. It's a class where you can play and win with no weapons. The standard interpretation of the D&D monk would, of course, be something like a Shaolin warrior monk from East Asian folklore and so forth, and East Asian history. I like to think of a few other types of characters that could work as a monk, especially with Xanathar's Guide to Everything, pretty much my favorite D&D book for 5e, where you get the Kensei monk, where they can take proficiency in a couple of weapons. I know it's kind of a curveball, but I like to think of John Wick as one of those monks. Just one of his weapons is proficiency in firearms, and if you see the way he fights, if you see the stuff he survives and endures, and the fact that he goes through everything with no body armor, just relying on natural agility and physical ability, it's a great example of how a D&D monk works in terms of role play.
Yes, another kind of sort of alternative monk I like to use would be I actually have a character in the wings I'm waiting to use an enslaved person who has been freed or recently escaped or something. Because if you think about it, they would have a very ascetic lifestyle due to that background, and on top of that, especially if they were doing harder physical labor, they'd probably be very built up and know how to survive in a fight. And a warrior might not make sense with that because you wouldn't have, or a fighter, because you wouldn't have weapons training, and a barbarian might also not make sense because I feel like the barbarian is very limited in its personality type appeal. Whereas with that, like, you can go a lot of different ways, especially with the differences in the monk background. And if you want to add a bit of storyline as your levels progress about how they stop advancing in monk as they start to earn a different lifestyle, I think that would make a lot of sense and could be very appealing. The character Morgana from the show Magi is very much like that.
There is actually some historical context for that too. There's a martial art called capoeira that was developed by enslaved people in Brazil, who they hid their martial art style within their dance so they could practice in plain sight. But obviously they weren't practicing with swords and stuff. It was entirely hand to hand. Now, one of the nice things about the monk class is that it has the various subclasses. I mentioned the Kensei, if you're going for more of a straight-on warrior type monk. I also really enjoy playing the Way of Shadow. That's essentially, if you want to play a ninja, that's what you're playing, is Way of Shadow. I'm not going to go tremendously into the details of all the different subclasses of either monk or rogue, just because there's so many, it would be, it would turn into a 50-minute video. But yeah, they're worth looking for. You've got the Shadow Monk that gives you, as I say, stealthy ninja type abilities, not just for you, but that can help the whole party. Also, very much worth looking at, and I think kind of underplayed. If you want to play a little bit of a more lighthearted, goofy type character, would be the Way of the Drunken Master.
Yeah, my personal favorite remains Way of the Four Elements, just because in the current state of the game, you really do need a touch of magic in there. I feel, at least. Someone could probably prove me wrong with an insane build, but yeah, that's very. All of the monk types, though, are very versatile. The only. My sort of finishing thought on monks is that you have to remember when you're describing combat that punching is not the only kind of unarmed strike you can do. Elbow strikes are some of the nastiest things you can pull off in close quarters fighting. And on top of that, people have knees, people have feet, people have their foreheads. Like there are a lot of ways to do a lot of damage to someone, and just using your hands is a great way for your character to get arthritis at the age of 20.
A quick note about the unarmed strikes of the monk. It's important to remember that as you level up, those strikes become magical. That's incredibly valuable for a character. It's just so frustrating if you wind up in the situation where you're a higher level fighter or paladin or whatever, and you don't have a magical weapon to use, which can happen. Maybe your weapon gets heat weaponed out of your hand, whatever it is. And yeah, did you have anything else to say on the monk? No?
Nope.
Okay. So we are going to be moving on now to the rogue, which if you're going for the sort of ninja build, then rogue would be the one contender, I would say, against monk for it, because they're very good at being stealthy. They're very good at being sneaky. The OG rogue was Bilbo Baggins from Lord of the Rings mythology, specifically from The Hobbit. He was their burglar, and yeah, he had natural stealthy abilities, which he built up as it went on. It's interesting because rogues are often played as being high in charisma, and Bilbo was kind of the beginning of that. He gets through a lot of situations by talking their way out of it. So instinctively, you want your rogue to be very high in their dexterity, and wisdom is also always a second great stat, just from a practical point of view. But if you want to play that character who lies to the guards and gets through situations like that, then charisma certainly makes sense as a second stat.
Yes, and another great example of a rogue in modern fantasy who, until the last season, was still a great character would be Arya Stark. She had all of the abilities of the Way of the Trickster rogue, in my opinion, especially with Arcane Trickster, to add on to that, especially with the magic, but also still being much more based in physical combat overall. And with both of these characters, there is a commonality, which is still a requirement in making rogues, and that your parents have to be dead. That is a legal requirement, and it is in all of the original rogues as well.
It would be really fun, just for the sake of it, to make a rogue who's just a perfectly happy, well-educated, like there's like a whole family of rogues. That could be a really interesting sort of a pirate clan or a ninja clan type situation to sort of break that mold. But yeah, backstories in D&D are funny things. As a DM, I really like them. I'm actually wrapping up a campaign now. And two of the three characters had very well-developed backstories that I absolutely incorporated into the campaign. The big bad wound up being somebody from one of the characters' past. And it works. But when it's the same backstory you've seen every time, and however edgy you think your rogue is, they're not. I'm sorry. If your rogue's parents are dead and you describe them as looking like they shop at Hot Topic, it's not, it's not doing it anymore. You need to come up with something different, something better. Another example of a rogue character and of a very specific type of rogue, it's a little bit of a variation from the class, but once again, Xanatar's Guide gives us the Swashbuckler, which, as I say, it's not as based in stealth, it's not as based in subtlety. Some of their abilities are specifically charisma-based. But, you get to play Jack Sparrow. You can't, it's hard to really beat that.
True.
And it gives you some combat versatility that other rogue types don't have.
Yes, and what I would say for making that sinister, edgy character that everyone likes so much, this isn't a very good subtype, in my opinion. I feel it's been really outclassed by all the others, but its style gets it an honorable mention here in the Mastermind Rogue. I really like the concept behind it, even if the abilities tend not to translate very well to combat in my experience with it. And on top of that, if you want to make that character who's always sitting on their swivel chair behind their desk, planning out everything perfectly, or you want to play Silco from Arcane, because that's going to be what happens going forward for a lot of people, that's the one you go with. It's not charisma-based as well, which is a bit of a divergence from the normal class. It's more intelligence-focused, which could lead you in a very interesting direction with the character, especially as I find that Rogue is one of the few classes where a higher intelligence but low wisdom build still makes sense.
True.
Yeah, so you can do a lot of interesting things with it in roleplay, but for a combat-oriented game, I would recommend against the Mastermind.
So one of the problems with Mastermind, or with a lot of classes in D&D and subclasses in D&D, is that they wind up being outclassed by other classes. So if you're playing, I don't know another great term for it, but that archetypal villain type who's the puppet master, I guess, who's pulling the strings from behind the scenes, who's got a very, wheels within wheels kind of plot going. You're playing a wizard. It's just a wizard. That's a wizard. That's called a wizard. That's what a wizard is. But that being said, if you wanted to, for example, multi-class your wizard, and for some reason you're not playing Bladesinger, come on, D&D, it's great that you give us all these options, but there's a certain point where certain things just get completely left behind. point is, getting back to my point, thank you for that break. We're back. The point is, though, the Mastermind is a good build for that. If you wanted to play that character who started out in the slums, so here's your edgy backstory. Your character started out from the slums. They started out as a thug or a burglar or whatever else everybody else around them was trying to survive in the slums. And they did it, but they didn't do it by being the biggest and the strongest or by being the most violent. They're more like a Meyer Lansky type criminal. They're more of a mob boss where they manipulated the people around them and used their great intelligence to build up their following. And then, as you level up, then you might then take some levels in Wizard or whatever else, because at that point you've got that kind of character. So you can make it work, you can make it make sense, and definitely, as Mara said, D&D is not all combat. As a matter of fact, the more advanced you get at it, the more you get into it, we've discussed in previous videos, combat actually becomes the less interesting part of D&D.
Yeah.
And my final thought on this is going to be sort of multi-classing options and recommendations. Monks are hard to multi-class because a lot of the other classes are based on having specific equipment and abilities, and monks are actually hampered by having more equipment. But a great multi-class option for monk is cleric or druid, or any spellcaster that uses their wisdom as a modifier. Monks get a buff to their AC from wisdom, so it gels really well. I've done it myself in a party that didn't have a cleric. I multi-classed my monk into cleric, and it was a thing of beauty.
Yes, and my sort of final thought is also that druid and monk work very well together, especially with the whole unable to use iron weapons thing, because generally speaking, a monk will never use a weapon anyway, and so it's effectively not a debuff. And on top of that, if your character is one of the ones who is always probably smoking something in the party, because we all have that one friend, then them smoking something could also be their arcane focus, which could be amazing because you think that they're just a wizard basically, and then they punch you so hard that it does magical damage and you die. And that's sort of my final thought on the matter.
So yeah, if you want to play Kung Fu Panda, there's a build for that apparently. Now, as far as the rogue, we've already mentioned that a rogue wizard multiclass works really well. A rogue bard multiclass is a thing of insanity and beauty, especially because rogues get the expertise ability, as do bards, meaning you double your proficiency on whatever ability you have expertise in. So there are skill monkey builds out there that are just beautiful. I've played a character like that, and it was just, I mean, if you make that character a halfling, they can never possibly fail at anything. And it's just a question of whether you hate your DM enough to give this person the lucky feat.
Oh, you're making a rogue? No need to tell me that I need to quit.
Pretty much. And rogue fighter builds can be amazing, especially if you do something like the champion assassin crossover, because at that point you're just constantly critting. You're just, there again, it's a question of how much do I hate my DM. At any rate, we hope you found this interesting and enjoyable. We hope it sparked some ideas, some creativity for maybe some new and interesting ways to go with these classes. There was nothing wrong with them, apart from going overboard with the edgy backstory. There was nothing wrong that people were doing with them, but it's always nice to sort of expand and think things through. So, Internet, tell us your thoughts. What are your favorite builds? And with that, we thank you so much for watching, and we will look forward to seeing you on the next one.